my distinct pleasure to moderate a debate on prayer in the public schools. We have two speakers, neither of whom really needs an introduction to the local community. John Graham Altman will be speaking in the affirmative that there should be the possibility of sponsored or led prayer, meditation, or release time in the schools. Professor Silverman will be speaking in the negative. Before we start, I would just like to make one quick point for the chemistry department, and that is, next door, there is a final going on from 6 to 9 p.m. So assuming we get out before they do, for these poor students, could we all leave quietly? If there is any debate, please take it outside of the building and then let it loose. But for those students, no. The format of the debate will be as follows. Each of our speakers will speak for 8 minutes. Then each will have 5 minutes for rebuttal, at which point we will be taking questions from the audience. I would ask all of you who have questions, please to have questions and not extended statements. So questions to our speakers would be much appreciated. Long statements would not be. So with that, let me introduce our first speaker, John Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We'll be up before 9 o'clock. I welcome the opportunity to come, and I thank the American Civil Liberties Union. Over the first thing they did is put me over on the left. Well, I suppose I'm on your right, so we'll begin with that. Without too much ceremony, let me begin, because I'm glad to be here tonight, and I'm delighted that the subject is adopted as it is, and I'll read it. Resolved that there should be allowed and officially sanctioned sponsored prayer, meditation, or release time in public schools. And that word should there will eschew the need for the nagging legalism in the discussion of those who would proceed simply to whether or not there should be some time in the schools and a set-aside time. I want to box out some time in the schools to have this prayer, meditation, discussion, or release time, and it needs to be structured. I'll tell you why, because we just can't run our schools in a willy-nilly, helter-skelter way. Building principals have to organize their time now. Teachers have to organize their time. And much as we, for example, as Colonel Watson will remember, we are required to put, let's say, 80 minutes a week in elementary schools of art, 80 minutes of music, 40 minutes of PE. We can set aside easily 30 or 40 minutes a week for this instruction, the spiritual instruction. I don't much care if the building principal wants to do it one 40-minute clip on Friday or 2 20-minute clips, 5 8-minute clips. That's up to the building principal, to her and him to decide. I would suggest, of course, that the upper grades be during the homeroom period, and the lower grades, whatever will be it's appropriate for them to do. What I want to do is carve out some time to give to this and give it the same dignity and the same sanction as we do to, say, lunch period. Lunch period comes, the time's announced, and the teacher says, fine, all of those of you who want to go into the lunchroom and eat and buy your lunches, line up and go in there. Those of you who brought your lunches, those of you who want to go outside and be calm, do that, and those of you who want to study, go and study. That's the sort of thing we need a structured time set for it. There are 3 reasons I can lay out tonight. I only have 8 minutes, and I've used 2 of those already. Number 1, Voltaire in troubled times said if there were no God, it would be necessary to invent it. We have troubled times, so the first reason we need this is an absolute necessity. Morals and ethics in this country have abandoned a great segment of the population. Unless you've been in a coma for the last 30 years, you know we're about to enter a new dark age. Crime's on the increase. General disorders on the increase. Licentiousness is on the increase. By the school year of 1994, if the figures of projections are correct, over half of the students who enter the public schools of Charleston County will be illegitimate, sired by the illicit activities of a boy and girl. We can't hire enough police. We can't build enough jails. We've got to stop trying, at least get away somewhat from treating these things with bad consequences. We've got to move in to a spiritual, to an ethical environment where we stop this before it starts. So it's absolutely necessary to offer in the schools some ethical codes. There's a credibility issue. It's the second point. It's twofold, one with the public, one with the students. First of all, we can't tell the public, we can't tell the taxpayers that we are preparing these students for life when we totally omit the spiritual lessons of 5,000 years, when we omit the ethical values and the moral values. The public is entitled to call upon its institutions for use. The schools now teach many things that they may or may not should do. They're called upon to teach black history month, sex ed, driver ed, oral hygiene, tobacco awareness, drugs, alcohol, all because we think they further the common cause. The public has a right to call upon its public institutions to further the common good. Churches and homes are great places for these things to be taught, just as they are for the other things I've named to be taught. But the public has a right to call on its public institutions to further its progress. The second part of that credibility is with the student. We cannot have credibility with a student if we tell them we're preparing them realistically for life. When they go about seeing churches, synagogues, they see on television Passover, Easter, they see Hanukkah, they see Christmas, and they say, what is it? And we say, shh, no, can't discuss that in school. We deny them the evidence of their eyes and ears because they say this is out in the community. We say we can't discuss it with you. It would be to attempt to prepare a young man or a young woman for life without discussion of the ethicality involved in the Old Testament, the New Testament. It's just like trying to teach low country geography without mentioning the word rivers or bridges. Don't dare mention it. The third and final reason I'll advance this evening is it's just plain silly not to. We've come in this country not to a position of neutrality towards religion, but active hostility towards religion. The Bible and religion is treated as some sort of box containing radon emissions, or PCPs, or asbestos, radioactive waste. We are not an Islamic nation. We are not a Buddhist nation. We are a nation founded and built on the Judeo-Christian ethic. That is our heritage. Bible-based beliefs are an integral and important part of the culture of America. We simply cannot produce that graduate when he or she does not understand that heritage. We simply can't explain it without it. We are an outgrowth of that environment. The belief in the Judeo-Christian ethic has been the glue that's held society together time after time in times of stress. I tell you that children, that young boys and girls in the care of the public schools are entitled to a knowledge, an understanding, and an appreciation of their national cultural patrimony. We are deceiving them when we teach them without weaving this in the warp and woof of the structure. We don't have, in my judgment, an option to teach that, but it's a necessity. We don't have merely a right to teach that, but there is a duty to teach that. I will not, within my authority, within what influence I may have, deny these children the right to their lawful, rightful cultural heritage, and I don't really believe you want to do that either.
Yes, we do have a lot more crime than we did in 1960 when prayer was in school. We have more licentiousness, illegitimacy, as was mentioned. Times have changed. We also have more problems in a lot of other areas, in drugs, but I don't think that it's any more due to lack of prayer, sponsored prayer in schools, any more than the fact that Mr. Altman is on the school board now and he wasn't in 1960. There are lots of complicated reasons for this. I do think that prayer in schools, first of all, as Mr. Altman knows, violates our U.S. Constitution, in particular our First Amendment. And a law and order person like Mr. Altman, I'm sure, would want to engage in civil disobedience or to take wasted taxpayer money by a court case that might ultimately arise from it. But even assuming that we should have prayer, that it would be nice to have prayer in public schools, the question might arise as to which prayer should we have? Now, when I was a student in school, we did have prayer in school. What it usually was the Lord's Prayer, which we recited without thinking much about the words of it. Yet our parents, at least a lot of our parents, were upset about our having to do this. Among other reasons, the Catholics were upset because we were using the King James Version of the Lord's Prayer. The Catholics wanted the Lord's Prayer from the Douay Bible to replace a governmentally sanctioned Protestant version. Jews were uncomfortable because they were forced to recite words from a Messiah they didn't accept. The practice of establishing a governmentally composed prayer was one of the reasons that many colonists left England to seek religious liberty in America. There is a real problem, even though prayer might sound on the surface as something that would be nice to have. It's sort of like an unnamed Democrat for a while was doing very well, beating George Bush, until a Democrat was named. We have a lot of problem as to what kinds of prayer that we would be using in our public schools. You also mentioned possible release time, where we could treat prayer as if it's like going to lunch, where some people would perhaps leave the room while others are there for prayer. Now, a child who wants to be accepted by his or her peer group in school can't comfortably opt out of prayer that is sponsored, approved, conducted, endorsed, and administered by the school authorities. Why are we so anxious to force children to worship and pray in ways that might be objectionable to these students or to their parents? Even though we are considered by you a Judeo-Christian society, that doesn't mean that everyone is a Jew or a Christian. We have a much more diverse society than we used to have. Now, it might sound like, because I'm against sanctioned prayer in school, that I'm against having any mention of religion. I agree with Mr. Altman that we are basically ignorant of our religious heritage. But I think this is not a way to go about solving that problem. I would rather that we provide a broad and tolerant understanding of the diversity of religious thought in our nation and our world as part of their established curriculums in history, philosophy, social studies, and related disciplines. Books should be actively studied and discussed in our public schools, not just passively worshipped. And I think that would be a legal and a much more reasonable approach to have some part of our religious heritage in our public schools. And in fact, today I just got a fax from somebody who I believe you know and would agree with politically for the most part, Mr. Altman. This is a letter I got from Representative Roger Young, a well-known conservative Republican, who also opposes the one-minute prayer bill that we have in school. What he says is that we at the Baptist Joint, he sent me a letter from the Baptist Joint Committee, which consists of an umbrella group of 10 Baptist institutions, including the Southern Baptist Convention. He says that, the letter says that we at the Baptist Joint Committee very much applaud your efforts. As you may know, the Baptist Joint Committee has long sought to advance religious liberty and its political corollary, the separation of church and state. While we support and encourage voluntary free exercise by students, including private prayer, we are opposed to state-sponsored or even state-encouraged prayer in the public school. The state has no business telling our children how or even when to pray. We appreciate you as a Southern Baptist speaking out on this important issue. And let me just close with another comment by somebody who's well known to everyone here that might help clear up why we have this widespread obsession with practicing religion in public. The person I'm speaking of is Jesus, who I have respect for as a teacher, and even though he does not, I don't believe in his divinity, I still think that he's had many wise things to say, as did Socrates, Buddha, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King. I especially liked parts of his Sermon on the Mount, like Blessed are the peacemaker, the merciful, the persecuted. But I especially liked what he said in Matthew 6:5, which is appropriate to our discussion today. When you pray, be not as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, when you pray, enter into the closet, and when you have shut the door, pray to your Father, which is in secret, and your Father, which seeth in secret, shall reward you openly. My question now is this. Can you say amen to Jesus, Mr. Altman?
All right, now each of our speakers will have 5 minutes to respond. First,
Yeah, well, I hope we can avoid the little cutesy, artsy, craftsy behavior over there. Yes, Jesus said that. And he told the parable of the Pharisee who was rending his garment, praying in public, showing how pious he was. And the old fellow over there slipped in there, the sinner said, I'm a sinner, I'm unworthy, Lord, but I'm praying quietly. And Jesus said it. He also said, if you're going to accept him as authority, to get together and pray. And he gave us a prayer to pray. It's called now the Lord's Prayer. He also said, go proclaim the gospel. But I'm not trying to come and pitch this tonight on what Jesus said or what the gospel said. I'm coming to try to put some order back in this community. Yes, Professor Silverman, times have changed. And people like you have helped change. And I want to go back. Morals haven't changed. Right and wrong hasn't changed. Not in the last 30 years. Stealing is still wrong. Mugging is still wrong. Rape is still wrong. We need to let young boys and girls know the consequence of that. I had thought, when he was going to talk about Jesus, I had thought the good professor was going to say to us that early on in life when he was a student, in exuberant, experimental ways, he had once read the Bible. But he didn't inhale. He didn't enjoy it. And he never did it again. I would hate to see students thrown upon it. I would fight utterly any effort to make students pray a particular prayer. But I would call upon each school to devote some time. It has to be structured. It has to be from 8:40 to 9 o'clock or some given time, where they could discuss things spiritual and some things moral without the prayer police running around. You've got prayer detectives on the walls. What's that kid doing over there? Praying down 911. Get him in, get him out is what they do. Prayer in school, and I've said this, and it's been in the newspaper, prayer in school is alone is a pretty poor way to go about it. I have never believed in the power of rote, enforced prayer. But when there are times set aside, when young boys and girls can begin to explore something they may not have found in their lives otherwise, some ethical background, some background of morality, discussing what it means. I am one on the board who is fond of punishment, as you well know. I'm a harsh disciplinarian, but there needs to be other things in life, and we need to teach these youngsters the benefits and rewards of doing good things instead of the punishments for doing bad things. You know, we have to have some break in this. We live in homes that are locked up, and we travel here, or I did in a car that's locked up, and I'm going home to a locked up home. We've got to do something in the community. I don't think that what I'm defending tonight is going to turn the community around, but it'll be a start. It'll be an effort in that direction, a way we can move. I believe that I had hoped that the professor would avoid the constitutional prohibition. The Supreme Court and then later aided and abetted by federal judges, just went insane on the issue of separation of church and state. Instead of a neutrality, there's a hostility. The Supreme Court, however, has never, to my knowledge, sanctioned voluntary prayer in school. And I think we can establish the system very easily. Lunch is not mandatory. We can very easily establish a system that will work in the schools, that will allow young people to be exposed to something they may never have had before in their lives, some enrichment through that process. I firmly am convinced that one of the problems in America today, and perhaps a great underlying problem, that we've gotten away from what's right and wrong. We've become a society of what can you do for me instead of what can I do for myself and what can I do for my fellow people. I think this will help. I think moments like this, times in the school, may plant seeds that will grow outside of the schools and enrich their lives and make them better. As for my friend Roger Young, I'll speak with him tomorrow.
I heard you say that perhaps I read the Bible for one and only time. I've read it many times, and I agree with some of the things in it. I disagree with some of the things in it. I don't take Jesus as an authority. What I hope we will have in school is a situation where we listen, discuss all options that we hear from all the authors we read. One of the problems about having the Bible read in school, when I was there, and I would think if we were to try to illegally introduce it again, would be the question, should we then discuss the rights and wrongs of it? Should we talk about interpretation? And that's one of the problems that we have with when we have states that don't have the separation of church and state. We want to decide what the best prayer is. The best prayer, that comes from the best religion. How do we determine what the best religion is? Well, let's have a war, and that determines the best religion. One of the reasons we have such religious liberty in our country today is because we do have the separation of church and state. We can't establish a religion, and we, at the same time, give the free exercise to religion. We live in a country with more religious faiths to choose from than any other. I don't see why we should just say it's a Judeo-Christian country and then talk more explicitly about what that means in terms of what our children should be doing in school. Sure, we should teach them not to steal, not to murder, but not because a particular deity that we may or may not believe in said that, but because there are a lot of good humanistic reasons to avoid murdering and stealing. One of the values that I hope we'll teach is that we should obey our Constitution. And though I'm not a lawyer, I do know that there have been many tests of prayer in school, including a moment of silent meditation, and that has been declared unconstitutional. I would hope that we would teach our students the importance of the Bill of Rights, our First Amendment, which does help build a wall of separation between church and state. Not because we're hostile to religion, but because religion belongs in the churches and synagogues and in the families, not for a government to tell students how and what time and when to pray. Americans, I think, can rest assured that their right to pray is just as firmly guaranteed as it was when the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution and provided for the separation of churches and state. Any attempt to join religion with the state, I think, injures them both. And as far as students praying in school, Mr. Altman and I agree that there shouldn't be any kinds of rote prayers. And we both agree that prayer should not be forbidden in schools. I know I see a lot of prayer in school. Every time I give a math exam, I see many of my students praying. But the difference is they're praying privately. They're not praying because some authority figure said, this is the prayer that we'll be saying today. They're not praying because a government-sponsored prayer is what is required. That's why we don't have any problems with parents telling us we don't like the kind of religion that's being taught in our schools. Students are free to pray privately whenever they want, and they're not forced to pray. That's the way it should be. That's how our Founding Fathers meant it. And again, it's not just a liberal or a conservative thing. Let me give a quote from Barry Goldwater, who is a Republican that I again expect that Mr. Altman supported, and maybe he'll also want to have a talk with him as well. He said that by maintaining the separation of church and state, we have avoided the intolerance that has divided the rest of the world with religious wars. To retreat from that separation would violate the principles of conservatism and the values upon which the framers built this democratic republic.
Okay, either of our speakers would be more than happy to entertain any questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
I thought I might have seen some room for a middle ground. Surely that can't be so. So maybe I could get both of you to address it. It seemed at one point that you both did endorse the idea to talk about religion's all right. Or a structured time for an ethics discussion might be acceptable. Is it possible that allowing some sort of structured time where matters of right and wrong could be discussed both for humanistic reasons and for presumably spiritual reasons, would that be acceptable to either one of you as a middle ground?
I don't have a bit of problem with, I think the 2 points you raised. Number one, the study of comparative religion. That's got to be done somewhere in someone's life if they're to be educated. And a good place to start may be at the high school level. Certainly it's a good college course to take, of courses to take. I would think, I'm not afraid of the atheistic view, and I would not mind it a bit if that were discussed in a class. I just really wouldn't. I think that any discussion of spiritual, moral, or ethical values can't be had in a vacuum, and I would not fear that one bit. I think you've got to be careful not to foreclose anything. You know, I'm not afraid of atheism. Don't think it's wise. Don't think it's right. I'm not afraid of it.
I'm not afraid of Christianity either. And I'm not afraid of comparative religion courses. We have many at the college here. And for instance, we have students here who can take an excellent course on sacred texts. It consists of a critical analysis of selected major texts from the world's religious traditions. And I think that's fine for our college students to take. It might be good for our high schools and elementary schools too. I'm not as familiar with them as Mr. Altman, but I still think there might be some problems. One of them is that our students at the moment, I don't believe, are grounded in reading, writing, math, and science. We also have less time spent on it than in other countries. I don't know that we want to take too much time away, or whether or not we want to use taxpayer money to hire specialists in comparative religion that we don't have, because we wouldn't want to leave it just to the untrained people. And also, I don't know if you would want to deal with irate parents who might object to people teaching about religions other than their own faith. I know that happens even at colleges and universities. I especially expect it would happen at the high schools.
Sure. Yes.
Just a factual question before him. The Bible, as we know, that getting into this country, when we first started out, the first educational system was based on the teaching of this Bible right here. So now, do you believe that since this was the first textbook that we started with as a nation, do you think we ought to throw it out of the schools now?
Well, the Bible was not ever formally a textbook in this country. I think there are a lot of myths.
I think my question was, do you believe that this was one of the first textbooks that the educational system in this country started off with? I think that's what my question was.
Well, it depends on how you read the Bible. If you're reading it as a textbook where you can criticize as well as reading other textbooks, that would be fine. If we have a course in the Old Testament and New Testament, that's fine. But if we're teaching this as religion, if we're saying this is what we expect people in this country to follow, then we have a problem. Then we have a lack of separation of church and state that we need. So I don't have any trouble about bringing up the Bible as part of our religious heritage and how it's helped shape certain values for certain people, as long as you're willing to openly have it discussed about whether people believed or what they didn't believe, and we don't have this as a formal religion or have any prayers used.
The Bible also
I'm
has
sorry,
horse.
I would like to have each person get a say first.
Yeah, this is Mr. Silverman. Why do you think parents shouldn't be allowed to vote for themselves as to whether or not there will be any kind of religion or prayer, what have you, in the schools that their child will attend? Kind of like here at the college, why shouldn't graduating seniors be the ones deciding whether or not there'll be prayer at graduation, as opposed to having the faculty do that for them?
All right, well, what we have in this country, and I understand the feeling that the majority should rule. That's what a democracy is about. And the majority should rule on a lot of issues. We should be able to decide who our elected representatives are by majority rule, but not when it comes to violating our Bill of Rights. Our Bill of Rights is there to protect the minority view. We should not have each individual institution to decide whether to have prayer, what kind of prayer it would be. We need to have the minorities protected, and that's what our Bill of Rights is about.
Yeah, the Continental Army had chaplains. The coinage from the very earliest times in our country had references to God, in God we trust, this sort of thing. Not initially, but as time went on. Surely legislators, congressmen, judges of various federal courts, various levels, know this. I mean, they carry this money around in their pockets. Many of them perhaps presumably went to chaplains in the military to seek guidance, solace, whatever. Wouldn't they have recognized from Continental Congress times, even before the Articles of Confederation, let alone the Constitution, that there was some sort of that even though you have a separation of church and state, nonetheless there was some kind of recognition within the state of some sort of religious or some sort of deity or some entity that was recognized and to some extent adopted and even funded by the state itself?
Well, in terms of In God We Trust, that was not put on our coins early on. That was put on our coins in 1955 under the McCarthy hysteria. And prior to that, what we had on our coins was e pluribus unum. What that means is from many comes one. Now that, I think, is a more appropriate form that I would like personally to think of our country as standing for, where people from all lands and backgrounds come here and become one as the United States.
Oh, yeah.
What about the other part regarding chaplains?
The chaplains in our Congress, I know we have that. I'm not sure technically if that would be constitutional, but I know no congressman would bring that up because it would mean sure defeat. I do know that in our founding fathers were somewhat more courageous in saying what their religious beliefs were before being an atheist or even a humanist today is considered such a dirty word. But I think as a technical, I'm not sure if it's constitutional or not, but I agree that there is a religious heritage that this country has, and it should be recognized. I'm not sure the taxpayer money is the way to go in recognizing it.
Yeah, let me say that I think it is dangerous as a debater for Professor Silverman to put all his bets on the constitutionality of it, because if that's the argument, I was not confident to debate the constitutionality question with you. But if that is your argument, when the Supreme Court changes its mind, and it will, then your argument falls. But something you just said came to my mind. we do have the melting pot theory. It may not work so well anymore. Some people say it's more like a layer cake now. We have that e pluribus unum. What I'm concerned about is what is the unum? Who are we as a country? What are we as a country? And we can take these diverse views and we can bring them together, but for some reason, the schools have been required to eschew any talk of religion or ethics or spirituality when it relates to that. I'm concerned with the unum. Who are we? Right now, we're a pretty reckless society, in spite of what the good work the chief can do.
I have a copy of the letter, the prayer the Supreme Court made its decision on in 1962. I'd like to read it and then I'd like to address Professor about one question. It says, Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence on Thee and we beg Thy blessing upon us, our parents, our teachers, and our country. Very bland, simple prayer. And the rationale of the Supreme Court said that was psychologically damaging to our children. That was their rationale. It went along with this prayer. My question now is, sir, I don't believe you read the Constitution. Because the Constitution, 4 times, my question is, 4 times it says that we depend on God and we seek God for guidance. In the Constitution, 4 times. I would ask you, sir, if the Constitution tells us to depend on God and seek God for guidance, why can't we do it in our schools just in the sense of addressing God in some degree?
I did read the Constitution, and I didn't see God mentioned in the Constitution.
4 times.
I would defer to any lawyers who have seen God mentioned in the Constitution.
Sir, in the back.
Mr. Altman, my question is for you. As you know, teachers do not teach oral hygiene or driver's education without some sort of specialized training. Which training or what types of training would you suggest for instructors that will be teaching spirituality? And also to go along with that, should non-Christian educators be denied teaching credentials because they are non-Christians since they would rightfully, I think, refuse to teach a prayer or lead a prayer which they disagree with?
I think the second part of your question is just plain silly. Of course not, and you know that. You're not in the court yourself. You know that. But no, we give our teachers the same sort of training we give them now in curriculum guides and other matters. They can deal with it. We're not discussing homiletics or theology. Just trying to get little kids talking about what's right and wrong and why. And I think we can do that. And I just can't imagine a world that I want to live in where a good Jewish person would be offended by offering some moral leadership to some young people. I don't see that at all. I don't believe in an enforced prayer. And I teach an adult Bible class at my church. I'm a Christian, United Methodist. And I teach I study and I teach, and I tell my class we're all Jews. We just are Jews who believe the prophecies have been fulfilled, and the Messiah came 2,000 years ago, and others are still waiting.
But are we all Muslims, sir?
Absolutely not. Nor is this country a Muslim country. Nor do we have to provide for that unless they come into school, and we'll provide for it. I have seen teachers do wonderful things with little children who of the Islamic faith. They've gotten them to introduce themselves, their religion. There's a lot that can be done. There's a lot that goes on in the classroom now. It's of good things. When we had...
Thank you, Mr. Altman.
Okay.
Well, I'm a Jew as well as an atheist, and I know that a lot of Jews might be offended if its teacher decided at school to offer moral leadership by saying that
Well, excuse
he
yourself.
that believeth not in the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God shall be upon him. A lot of the moral leadership that understandably good Christians get is from Jesus, and if they want to teach what Jesus says, and that's perfectly acceptable, but it's not acceptable in the public schools.
This is a question for Mr. Altman,
Yes.
but I think both of you may be making this mistake. I think that there's, in my mind anyway, there's a confusion going on here between religion and morality. And then morality is a quite separate thing from religion. It could be based on religion, but it certainly need not be. So you can't really make an argument for religion based on morality. And let me try to, very quickly. I mean, the usual way the connection is made is by saying that well, we need God to punish people for sins. And I guess I don't want our children or anybody to avoid raping or stealing or robbing because they're afraid somebody might punish them. I think that's not the right reason.
Is this a question?
So the question is, what do you think? Sorry, what do you think the connection is?
I take your point about the distinctions which sometimes come between ethics and religion. I just take your point. I think it's well taken. And I think that from my vantage point, many times the Bible portrays God as in 1 Peter, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. It's a vengeful God, but it's also a loving and rewarding God. That we find that you do these good things and you be rewarded later and later. I take your first point, and I think your second point needed one more extension.
Yes, I have a question about what's wrong with right teaching by a religious person. How would you, this is Mr. Ashman, how would you consider, is it right or wrong? How would you teach religious intolerance? Is it right or wrong? Or how would you teach atheism? Is it right or wrong? If you were to teach spiritual with children in school, how would you educate our teachers who ask questions like this?
Same way we do now on these other matters, same way we did on sex education. I've only talked to Professor Silverman one time, every Thursday of last week. We talked on the phone about 5 minutes, and I said, don't worry, we don't teach anything too well. But we have curriculum guides, and we give teachers inserts on sex education and drugs, and that's how we do it.
Can you be more specific? Is it wrong according to you being atheist? Or is it, can you be more specific on this fact?
I'll try to
Is it wrong to be an atheist? Is it morally wrong to be an atheist?
Is it morally wrong to be an atheist?
Yes. That's a spiritual question, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm a theist. I believe in God, and I think people who do not believe in God have listened to both. I'm not here to give a deposition in that. I'm not here to offend anyone. But there's some atheists, just non-religious people who are some mighty, mighty good people. And there's some who profess to be good Christians and Jews who are just horrible people. What you profess is not necessarily what you are. And I'm well aware of that.
I agree with Mr. Altman that what we do in school often is not done well, but I think there are special dangers for not doing religion well if it's being taught, like saying that atheists are immoral, as some teachers might, or that Jews are sinners and they're going to hell, or that Buddhists are not right, anyone who is not Christian is not right, which is what might be taught down here. I'm not saying that you would advocate that, but we already have enough problems in our public schools today. We don't have to add any religious strife to this problem.
Yes, no. No, there was one behind you.
I have a question for both of you, especially Mr. Silverman. As a teacher, my understanding is that I could go into a classroom and present the Humanistic Manifesto, but by the same token, I could not constitutionally read the Lord's Prayer, also known as the Disciples' Prayer. Is my understanding correct? That's what I've been told as a teacher. And beyond that, how tolerant is that?
Well, I don't know what you can do about the Lord's Prayer. There might be a course where you could teach about the Lord's Prayer, or you could teach about different kinds of philosophy. If not, I have no objections to having, as we talked about, a comparative religion course. Now, lots of things are talked about in school, but not necessarily advocated. Presumably, you can teach about Nazism too, what the Nazis did, and a lot about communism, Attila the Hun. That doesn't mean you're advocating these positions. Anything that you can teach where students will learn about history, philosophy, social studies, that would be fine with me, but not teach it as dogma.
Mr. Altman, your main concern seems to be that young people should learn the difference between right and wrong, because you've recited a million instances where the society is going wrong. Aren't there innumerable opportunities in the context of almost every study that the children are participating in, that a creative teacher can find opportunities to discuss right and wrong, respect and disrespect?
Yes, there are. But
Then why don't we concentrate on that, sir?
well, you let me finish.
Yes.
I didn't know you were used to it.
It was an afterthought.
All right. There are ways, but the best way to do it is to get some background of religion.
One of the problems I've seen with the whole issue on prayer, from the federal level, state level, is it seems I haven't heard anybody try to determine what is involved with it. My question is, would you support a test to find out what prayer really is, if it's effective? If it is effective, how is it effective, and what is done to make it effective? Say you take 1,000, there are 1,000 people right now that are dying of incurable disease. The physicians will all admit to this. Take 1,000 of them and put their names and draw their names and divide them into 10 little groups. Take one group and pray for them. Another group, you don't pray and don't do anything. Another group, you get rabbits and goods and horseshoes to. Another group, you take black magic. You do everything you can to damage these people. And there are all sort of combinations there of 10 different groups. And then see what difference there is. If there's a difference, find out where that is. But on the praying group, get all the major religious leaders, get the Pope.
Thank you, sir. I think you've made your point.
Well, one of the troubles with kind of these discussions, it always deteriorates into something like this. Thank you for your comment.
How about an answer? Would you back trying to find out what's involved with prayer? People are talking about it, don't know what they're talking about.
Thank you, sir.
May I comment about prayer? In defense of some prayer, I think prayer can actually do a lot of good. I don't think it does good because a deity answers, but I think it makes people feel good, it changes people, and people can change things. Earlier, Mr. Altman quoted Voltaire about God. I'll quote Voltaire also. He said that God does a lot of good in the world, even if he doesn't exist.
Following up on Voltaire, Mr. Altman, you and people like you that want to do a radical departure from our position of religious neutrality have fond of saying this is a Judeo-Christian culture. But isn't it a fact that the culture, political culture out of which the U.S. Constitution was formed, really came from the values of the Enlightenment, which was an anti-clerical movement of the middle of the 18th century, of people like Voltaire and Rousseau, going down to Locke, going down to Jefferson, creating the civil government that we know of, which has as one of its strongest principles strict neutrality of religion. Isn't that, in a sense, a bypassing, a deliberate bypassing of what you call the Judeo-Christian tradition?
No. And you interested me in your first part of your statement was radically change the tradition of separation of church and state. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
When was O'Hara versus Puerto Rico? 1963?
What we've grown up with the last generation?
Well, and look at the last generation. But 1963 to 1992 is not, doesn't establish a lengthy national precedent. It's not the tradition of this country.
I have one question for both of you. There's been talk in the media lately about plans that have been introduced by various politicians about a voucher system for parents. The federal government gives the parents a voucher and says, okay, take this voucher to whatever school you want and send the kid there. this could allow, say, the parents to send the child to a private school where that kind of thing could be, done. How do both of them feel about that?
Well, I think that religious liberty assures every group the right to establish and maintain its own educational institution, but it also ensures every American that taxpayer money won't be used to subsidize religious beliefs that people don't agree with. So I'm for, as was Jefferson, a strict wall of separation between church and state.
I favor educational vouchers. It's been tried in this country, and it's about the one thing I can think of that the federal government's ever done that worked very well. It's called the GI Bill. The veterans were given vouchers, and they could take them to SMU, Wofford, Notre Dame, College of Charleston, anywhere they wanted. Cash in the voucher, get an education. Nothing wrong with that, nothing un-American.
I think we have time for one more question. Let's take 2 more questions.
Mr. Altman, I really don't understand what exactly you imagine instituting in the public schools. I mean, we've talked, part of this debate is about prayer. You don't want a prayer like the one the gentleman here read because you don't want a rote prayer. We've been talking about some way of instilling moral values, but you want it to be kind of objective, like maybe a course of comparative religions. You have very high ideals for the function that somehow spiritualizing public schools is going to have. It's going to completely remoralize the country. What exactly do you see being instituted in the public schools?
First, I do not claim, nor did I claim, to remoralize the whole country. This would be a small step, maybe. It might not work, but it would be a step in the direction of restoring the country. Depending on the age group, I'll be happy to talk about curriculum with you. I don't know if this is the place, but I would start off in more simple things in the lower grades and the upper grades, and I think a comparison with the Golden Rule and Hillel's comment when he was asked, "What is the law, teacher?" And he said, "That which is hateful unto you, do not thou then to any man." That is the whole law. All else is commentary. Said 40 years for grace. I think when you get up in the grades, you can discuss this thing.
So let me just call it up. So we're not talking about prayer, and we're not talking about a moment of silence.
I think a voluntary, generously given, worshipfully given prayer is fine. It's fine for me. It's fine for others. I do not believe everybody ought to stand up and pray because I say so. That just makes a mockery of the personal process. Many times people do pray in unison, but that's not, again, everybody up, pray. That doesn't work.
From your comments, it appears that neither of you would want to live in a system that required people to pray. But there's the other side of that question. What if we had a system where it required people not to pray? For example, a person gets up anyway. They say, "The heck with the Supreme Court, the state legislature, the school board, College of Charleston, math professors, whatever. I'm going to pray anyhow." They would get up every morning. Say it's a 5th grader gets up every morning before class, and he says 23rd Psalm, Lord's Prayer, whatever. Would we suspend him because he did this? Allow him to talk about it. Would we? It takes maybe 30 seconds to do this. Would we suspend him? Would we expel him? Would we call the police?
I think it would be awful if we didn't allow people to pray. In addition to not establishing a religion, we want to have free exercise of religion. And as I say, people can pray privately whenever they want. They can't interfere with other people's rights.
Privately meaning silence.
No, they can do it openly as long as it's not at an institution where it's interfering with other rights. But if people want to pray in their churches and synagogues or in the street corners, they have that perfect right every morning, afternoon and evening.
But not in the school.
Not during classes, certainly. If a student in school wants to pray at lunchtime, before lunch, before he eats, that's fine. Or in a math class while he's taking an exam, silently so he doesn't disturb the other students, that's fine too.
Okay, thank you all. I would like to give each of our speakers moment or two to sum up their thoughts, beginning with
Yeah, I'm here representing myself. And I've heard some good views expressed tonight, and I would enjoy the dialogue to continue with those views. I do not pretend to say that 2 20-minute periods a week in school will cause a remarkable change in this country. But I do know what I've seen in the last 30 years tells me that we've dropped the ball. We've got to do something. I do know that generally speaking, good things come from those who understand ethical values. Generally, ethical values are best found by me in a religious background. And I want to offer those children. I think, as the chief pointed out, the horror. I read of a lady in Russia who said when they thought that the ice was breaking, she took her children to a midnight mass and they took their names down. I think we've come in this country to a hostility toward religion. I do not understand it. Perhaps it's because in the past some religious excesses have happened. And religion stands ashamed for that for all time. But I cannot understand the hostility toward prayer or meditation in the schools. It boggles my mind. And I think it is important that we reintroduce those things into our public institutions.
I don't see the hostility toward religion that Mr. Altman sees. I do see a hostility toward perhaps the wrong kinds of religions or the wrong religious beliefs. I think that we do need to clarify values, to have humanistic ideals and traditions, but certainly we have as much freedom of religion as any other country in the world. Our politicians never hesitate to openly and publicly call for God's guidance. We have religious lobbies with great influence in Washington and every state capital. Here in Charleston, we have 24-hour television and radio stations that broadcast nothing but religion. And I think that it's good to have a society that is open to all religious beliefs and free to practice it everywhere they please, except that the state cannot impose religion, and if we're using taxpayer money for it, then we should not enforce any particular religion. This is what our First Amendment is about. This is what our Bill of Rights is about, and this, in my opinion, is what has kept America great.
Before you all leave, let me just make one final comment. Certainly this is a topic upon which there will be much discussion. I urge you, though, please, in deference to some future physicians next door, to hold this discussion outside of the building. Thank you all very much for coming.